In the first of the two videos, we looked at the history of Methodism from its beginnings until 1932, and in this, the second, we follow its history from then until today. In 1932, the Wesleyan Methodists, the United Methodists, and Primitive Methodists had come together to form the Methodist Church of Great Britain, but Victoria Road, formerly Wesleyan, and Aldergate, formerly United Methodist churches, did not immediately become one Tamworth Methodist Church. During the Second World War, because of demands upon members and rooms being requisitioned for the war effort, it was necessary for some groups from both churches to amalgamate at Victoria Road. Two such groups were the Junior Wesley Guilds, who met in the Ladies' Parlour at Victoria Road. Here we see a picture of the combined group around 1942. After the war, there was no inclination on the part of either church to build on the temporary arrangements by joining together on a permanent basis. They continued on their separate ways. An important figure in the leadership of Aldergate was Harry Baker, who's seen here, who served as secretary, treasurer, and Sunday school superintendent. In 1951, he became Tamworth mayor. Aldergate was noted for its very strong Women's Bright Hour, which had been founded in 1923 and led initially by Mrs. Lancashire, who also had an interest in the Young Ladies' League. She was one of the longest serving, and for many years the only, lady local preacher. She had led a life of public service and, during the First World War, was secretary of the Tamworth Ladies' League, shown here, with the buffet for the troops returning on leave from the front during the First World War. Each year the Aldergate ladies put on an annual concert at the church, and here we see them at the 15th such concert in 1970. The caption in the local paper read, "And looking very smart and attractive." Mrs. Lancaster's mantle had easily been taken on by Mrs. Amy Mothershaw, who we see third from the left on the first row. If the ladies were the strength of Aldergate, then that of Victoria Road was the Sunday school. Here we see the anniversary platform around the mid-1950s, with over 100 children on this alone, and older children and helpers in the balcony. Not shown here are the members of the congregation, consisting mainly of 400 adoring relatives and friends. With the ending of the baby boom and the reduction in numbers attending junior church, the platform was reduced in size, but was still accommodating around 50 children in 1963. Prior to the war, Sunday school treats had involved visits to nearby farms where children were entertained, or trips on the canal, but afterwards became more adventuresome with trips such as this to Wickstead Part in Northamptonshire, or to Rhyl, where this picture was taken on the 13th of August 1947, when the trip was blessed with a perfect summer's day. Transport was by means of 7 or 8 coaches, affectionately referred to as bunty buses. The journey could take as long as 4 hours. For such long journeys involving children, buckets of sawdust were essential. Later, trains were chartered from British Rail, as was the case in 1969. Everyone soon settled on the train, and it departed. Although a little crowded, the trains were quite comfortable. After a journey of just 2 hours, the train arrived. Everyone was eager to enjoy the day. Pushchairs were put up and babies handed to mums. Everybody made their way to the seafront. Here a youngster with bucket and spade walked determinedly across the sand. Although June, judging by the coats and jackets, there appears to have been quite a chill in the air. But it was a fine day that had been prayed for, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The time passed quickly, and all too soon it was time to be at the station to await the train for the return journey, and a pop and crisps for the children. The next Sunday school event was the Autumn Effort, the opening of which was preceded by the crowning of the Sunday School Queen. Here in 1959 we see the Queen flanked by her maids of honour, all of whom had been elected by the teachers and scholars. The annual Sunday School Christmas and New Year party was held in early January. It started at 4 p.m. with the tea, followed by games, and finishing with giving out of the children's presents. We see some of the teachers and children at the 1965 party. The junior church was divided into senior, junior, and primary departments. In the late 1960s, as a project, some senior boys filmed the exterior and interior of the building, together with life in the junior church. The film has been preserved. Here we see 3 groups of scholars with their teachers, Mrs. Jones, Mr. Jenkinson, and Mrs. Van Stone. The primary was led by Mrs. Woodward, assisted by Mrs. Foss and Mrs. Hall. The collection was taken early before it had chance to end up on the floor. It was taken up in a collection bowl very similar to this, except that the bowl itself was clear glass. The coinage was more substantial in those days and could be clearly heard as it dropped into the bowl. Children's birthdays were celebrated. Candles were lit. And the child had the honour of sitting in the birthday chair. The need arose for a creche, so the young people tiled and decorated a room. In July 1969, the junior church decided to take part in Tamworth's annual carnival. A lorry was kindly loaned for the occasion. The theme of the float was Children of the World, emphasizing how God cared for everyone. Much effort had gone into the costumes, but last-minute adjustments were still needed. The excitement of the children increased, but it was a matter of just patiently waiting for the float to leave for the start of the procession. At last the time arrived and the float pulled out of Mill Lane into Victoria Road. It was the custom of the teachers and staff to be photographed in front of the church at some stage during a minister's appointment. The earliest photograph we have is that shown here, taken in 1951 with Reverend Roland Priestley and his wife. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, there developed the need to provide for the interests of teenagers other than on a Sunday. So a youth club met. There were dances on a Saturday night. Jack Henshaw's girls' choir would take the gospel in song to outside organisations. Mrs. Hilda Griffiths formed a dramatic society. And over a period of some 5 years, there were as many as 10 full-length and 4 one-act plays. The first was Hotel Reposo in October 1959, the cast of which is shown here. The most memorable and ambitious was Toad of Toad Hall in January 1961, which is still remembered with affection some 60 years later by those who took part. The Dramatic Society did not confine itself just to plays. It followed up the success of the mock weddings of some 20 years earlier by staging a mock banquet in May 1962 called King of Kings, in which the guest of honour was Jack King, loyal and faithful servant of the church over many years. The evening was a good example of a chapel social event, with everyone enjoying themselves. The starter was a fancy dress competition, followed by the banquet itself with humorous after-dinner speeches. There was then singing, games and dancing. As always, the evening finished with the epilogue. The cost was 2 and 6. The final play, an historical drama called Shadow of the Eagle, was performed in May 1964. The contribution made by Mrs. Griffiths and her husband Tom to the work amongst the young people at Victoria Road with the Dramatic Society cannot be overestimated. Some of the youth club formed themselves into Victoria Road Meth's table tennis team, which took part in the Tamworth and District Table Tennis League. Sometimes there were two teams, A and B. The young people started a mission band, taking services at chapels in the Tamworth circuit. Relationships were formed within the church. Boyfriends and girlfriends were brought, and marriages took place. It was sad that Victoria Road did not survive to celebrate its centenary. Its closure was a bolt from the blue. A surveyor's report late in 1971 had revealed that roof repairs were needed at an estimated cost of £20,000, a considerable sum in those days, which was beyond the means of the church. At an open meeting, the sad but right decision was taken to close and join with Aldergate to form a new Tamworth Methodist church, to be called Central. The closing service took place on the 9th of April 1972. In March, this photograph was taken of the junior church scholars, staff and parents. The amalgamation went smoothly and was a great success, due in no little part to the quiet diplomacy of the Reverend George Diggle, who is seen here. Old stalwarts of Victoria Road worked alongside those from Aldergate to contribute to the life of the new church. Shortly following the amalgamation, the new church celebrated Jack King's and Alf Walker's 50 years of association with the Sunday School anniversary. If Victoria Road had been fortunate to have as organist a talented musician like Alf Walker, who could easily combine the syncopation and rhythms of the Blue Stars dance band on a Saturday evening with him playing on a Sunday morning, then Central was extremely privileged to have two organists, Alf Walker and Stan Sedgley, playing the electronic and pipe organs in tandem for worship, which symbolised the harmony within the newly formed church. The tradition of the photograph of the junior church staff with the minister continued. Here we see the Reverend George Diggle with his wife Olive in 1975. Reverend Diggle was succeeded by Reverend Frank Thixton. A problem of the nice kind had arisen. Aldergate was now inadequate for the growing numbers, but there was no room to expand laterally, so he hit on the idea of doing this vertically, by lowering the floor of the chapel by 4 feet and putting in a mezzanine floor, on which the worship area would be placed on the first floor and an additional room created beneath it. The total cost came to £63,628. For grant purposes, the cost of removal of pews and the floor by members was valued at £3,000. A working party was led by Reverend Thixton, who was very much a hands-on minister, and in this somewhat grainy picture he is standing on the partly constructed floor of what would become known as the lower schoolroom. Following the alterations, the church was reopened and rededicated on the 16th of September 1978. Utilised for the alterations were the proceeds of sale of Victoria Road, which was not finally sold until early 1977 for £12,000. This was because of planning blight arising from the council's consideration of plans for the area. Following the sale, it was converted into squash courts and later flats. The schoolroom was demolished and a gym and offices built later to become flats and apartments. £5,868 had been raised from gifts and special efforts. Among the latter were the usual and the unusual. There was a sponsored slim which raised over £500 and a balloon race involving the purchase of 17,000 balloons. Some of the young people took part in the 1978 carnival to publicise the balloon race. The alterations produced a spacious, light and airy worship area, offering a large degree of flexibility for the positioning of seating. At the beginning of the 1970s, an ambitious programme of 3 pantomimes, Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella and Aladdin, was staged, which involved all age groups from Central and beyond. Here we see Jack, Alice, Mrs. Durden, Alderman Grimshank and Simple Simon admiring the Beanio in Jack and the Beanstalk. A junior section of the Boys' Brigade was formed. Here, members of the section celebrate the centenary of Boys' Brigade in 1983. In the same year, a choral group was formed. In 1988, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of John Wesley's conversion at the Meeting House in Aldersgate Street, Central performed the Wesley Chronicles, written by Mrs. Hilda Griffiths. Sadly, the 1990s saw a decline in membership and closure of some organisations. Young Wives Plus, however, continued to be strong and celebrated its 25th anniversary on the 10th of October 1994. 2011 marked the 125th anniversary of the opening of the building, as well as the 240th of Samuel and Anne Wotton receiving the first Methodist preachers in their home. A full programme of events for the weekend of 10th and 11th of September to commemorate them was organised. These included an exhibition on the history of Methodism in Tamworth Town Centre as part of Heritage Open Days. Members had the opportunity to take part in role-playing of people involved in its history. 2013 was a memorable year too, since, in October, Central had the pleasure of celebrating the life and work of Mavis Orton, a member who at the age of 80 had retired from work as a missionary midwife in the Philippines to return to her hometown. In 1985, aged 52, she had offered herself as a medical missionary, but had been rejected as too old. But Action International Ministries accepted her, and she arrived in the Philippines in 1986. Seeing a desperate need to use her experience and training as a midwife, she started to assist home deliveries amongst the poor, where there was a high mortality rate amongst mothers and babies, so much so that mothers regarded confinement as one foot in the grave. Later, part of her own home was used for maternity care and childbirth. At first, it was just a few babies per month, but this grew to 150, with crowded outdoor waiting rooms for antenatal care. It was called the Shalom Christian Bahay Paanakan, otherwise the Shalom Christian Birthing Home, which told everyone that the home was not just where babies were born, but a place where Christian teaching also took place. News of Mavis's work and dedication reached England, and in the 2007 New Year's Honours, Mavis was awarded an MBE for services to midwifery in the Philippines. Even as far back as 2007, it was realised that the home was inadequate to deal with the demand, and Mavis had a vision for a purpose-built building to house the birthing home, which was realised in 2013, with the completion of the building of this on adjoining land. Central is located in close proximity to 2 other Methodist churches. 1 mile to the north is St Andrew's, and just under 2 is Glascote to the south. Glascote is the oldest Methodist church in the Tamworth and Lichfield Methodist Circuit, having opened in 1877 as a United Methodist Free Church. Like Central, there's no room to expand laterally. St Andrew's, by contrast, is the newest church, and located on what was, at the time, one of Tamworth's new housing estates on a plot of land adjoining what was to become Thackeray Drive, set aside for a free church. It was bought for £300 and the church opened on the 2nd of September 1966. As can be seen, St Andrew's is a relatively modern building, some 55 years old, set in spacious grounds which allow for expansion. For years it had been clear that having 3 Methodist churches in such close proximity was ultimately unsustainable. Efforts have been made to draw the 3 closer together, and the latest resulted in Central and St Andrews agreeing in 2017 to form one church body for both premises, known as New Life Methodist Church. 2021 is the 250th anniversary of the arrival of Methodism in the town, with its preachers being welcomed by Samuel and Anne Watton into their home. During this time, challenges have been faced and met, but those at New Life know that perhaps the greatest of these is yet to come.